So this meeting is being recorded. All right, so welcome to a panel discussion. NFTs, are they an artist's friend or a financial folly? So basically today we are asking questions. Are NFTs the key to the creator economy and a democratized art market? Or are they simply overhyped assets whose bubble is eventually going to pop? Should creators build communities around these assets, or should they stay clear of them? I'm hoping that the panelists today will share their insights on the potential evolution of NFTs with a sharp focus on the implications for artists and media makers. The way the panel is going to work today is that each panelist is going to give us a short 7-minute overview of their position on NFTs and some fundamental concepts so that we're all on the same page as far as this is concerned. First, we're going to hear from Zach. Zach Breaker is the CEO of Refine and Focus. They are a marketing, innovation, and growth consultancy trusted by the Fortune 500. And Zach develops human-centric and innovative growth solutions for businesses and leaders. One of the things that really stands out about Refine and Focus as a marketing firm is that they don't apply cookie-cutter methodologies to solving problems. Instead, they provide bespoke solutions for a wide range of clients, including some household names. And Zach holds a BA from Tufts University, where he studied history, international relations, and literature. Then we're going to hear from Balor Amgalan. Balor is a hybrid material designer and a design strategist who leverages virtual reality, craft materiality, I love that phrase, craft materiality, and blockchain technology to design culturally sensitive transition design interventions. And these have implications on the future of work and human-machine collaboration. In 2021, she ran a pilot program called Fiberium, an online community dedicated to artisanal NFTs as a part of her ongoing research on the materiality of digital artwork. Balor holds an MA in Material Futures from Central St. Martin's and an MFA in Design and Technology from the Parsons School of Design. Then we're going to hear from Martin Roberts. Martin Roberts is a media scholar who has taught in the Department of Film and Media Studies at Dartmouth College since 2016, including the class that he's currently teaching, Film, Television, and New Media. He has published on a wide range of subjects in global film and media studies, including ethnographic surrealism, global documentary, the Dogma 95 movement, IMAX film, national cinema, film culture, film subcultures, lifestyle television, world music, Japanese popular music, you name it. Martin has an incredible depth and breadth of critical media studies under his belt. And he is the author of Cornelius's Phantasma, and that is part of Bloomsbury's 33 and a Third album series. And Martin holds a PhD from Cambridge University. And I'm David Temez. I teach here in the Department of Art and Design. This panel is being embedded in my Introduction to Film and in parentheses Media Production course, which is a media and screen studies course that combines theory and practice. And I often bring in panelists to give students a current perspective on what's happening in the media space. I am currently doing a fellowship at the MIT Open Documentary Lab, where I'm investigating media co-creation methodologies, and I'm currently applying these methods in my narrative basics class this semester. And my background includes a master's from the MIT Media Lab, and I earned my MFA at MassArt at the Dynamic Media Institute. It's always strange doing a self introduction. I should have had somebody else do that for me, but for the sake of efficiency and keeping this moving, I introduced myself, but boy, that sounds very strange. Anyways, so here we are. We've got 3 panelists, we've got a moderator, and we have a fascinating topic. So let's get started. So Zach, take it away.
Good morning, everybody. I think there's a lot of hype and confusion about NFTs. And I want to start not with all the hype and confusion, but what got me into them, and kind of tell you the story of how I became very connected to them and to the communities. And I'm hoping that my remarks will provoke some curiosity. I don't think it's possible in this limited amount of time to really give you the whole picture, but at least this can give you a thread that you can follow. So one fine morning on Twitter, which I use addictively, and by the way, it's so nice to be here, and I really admire David. He's a dear friend and someone I look up to. So I'm very honored to be here and to speak with the esteemed panelists. But one fine morning, I saw this image on my Twitter feed. And I don't know if you like it, but I like it a lot. It deals with death and interesting topics that I care about. It has a street art feel, and I wanted to buy it. I wanted to buy the actual physical piece of art. And so I thought that the person that was sharing it on Twitter was selling it. And so I wanted to inquire, well, how and where do I buy this? And I quickly found out that this was this weird site called Foundation that I'd never heard of. And as I started to do my homework, it was being sold for like 20 ETH, and I had no idea what an ETH was. And so I started wanting to buy this work of art, and pretty soon I found out that this work of art is actually a digital work of art, and it was selling for essentially almost $100,000 as a digital work of art. And I just thought it was really cool, and it was kind of confusing and interesting. And I decided to say, well, I want to know more about what this is. So I found the artist on Twitter, and this is the artist. His name's Ray. And I sent Ray a note, and I'll show you the note. I'll show you the note that I sent to Ray. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yep.
So the first thing I said to Ray is I said how much I love your work and how much it means to me. Would you be willing to talk about your NFTs with me? And he told me about his NFTs, and I interviewed him. And he talked about this whole world of NFTs, which is basically artists that are creating images digitally. And those images are scarce. And the reason that they're scarce is that they're minted on the blockchain. So they have a unique identifier. It's kind of like buying an image and a certificate of authenticity. And so the fact that people were collecting these scarce images, it didn't really strike me as strange, because I collected sports cards growing up. I've always enjoyed collecting things. And so when you have scarcity and you have talent, it made a lot of sense to me how those dynamics work. But what I didn't quite get was the terms. Like, what does it mean to mint a piece of art in Web3? And how do you buy something in Ethereum? And all these terms were really strange to me, and I had to learn them. But what I want to suggest first and foremost is I found an artist whose work I love, and this artist was only generating work in Web3 as NFTs. And he was minting them, and he was amassing a huge following. You know, this person has a huge following of, tens of thousands of people, all of whom are excited and supporting this digital artwork. And so I knew I wanted to get involved, and very quickly I did. And so I started to decide, well, what kind of work do I want to collect? What kind of artists do I like? And how do I want to support those artists? And what I found very quickly is that there's it's a very difficult thing, to look at work like this. These are all NFTs. And to objectively look at this work and say, oh, the one in the left-hand corner is more valuable than the one in the right-hand corner. You can't just do that. You can't just look at a bunch of digital images and try to assess their value just on the look, because there's so much more that goes into developing value and preference and taste. What you have to understand is that every single piece of art, and by the way, these are all my NFTs that I've collected. Every single piece of art here represents a community. Every artist has a tremendous community behind them. And what drives the value is that they're creating scarce work for a community in which there's lots and lots of demand. And so very quickly, I found some really cool artists, especially from all over the world. This was the artist I found next. His name was Omid. And this is an 8-second piece, and I really love it. I'll show it with you. So this was an 8-second piece, and I was curious, like, why is this piece selling for $20 when the other piece I liked was selling for $100,000? Like, it just makes no sense to me. And so I started to learn that it's truly about, like, why is an Andy Warhol painting of a can selling for multiple millions of dollars when if I draw a painting of a can, it's going to sell for nothing? And it made sense to me that what we're dealing with is brands, and what we're dealing with is communities, and that the painters and the artists that develop communities around their work are really building value for people who collect that work. So that's the high level, but let me tell you a few things that make this interesting for artists in response to the question that David posed around value, and about whether this is a, what's interesting here for artists. So first and foremost, when someone sells an NFT, like if you were to sell this NFT to someone else, the artist would get a percentage of the sales in perpetuity for the rest of their life and their children's life, and so on and so forth. So it's every single time this piece sells, that artist gets like 15% of the sale in perpetuity. So imagine if you're a filmmaker early in your career, your first work sells for $1. Later in your career, that same work might sell for $10 million. You're going to get 15% every single time it sells. That's a new royalty model that's unique to NFTs. Probably not exclusively unique, but it's a feature of NFTs, is that the artist can participate in the economics in really interesting ways.
1 minute.
Oh, I haven't even got into anything yet. Okay. And the other thing is everything is completely transparent. So if you look at history, I can see who's bought this, who sold this, when it was bought, when it was sold. The provenance is very, very clear. And from that point, I began to become very interested. I started creating work. So here's my work. And I started minting NFTs and selling NFTs myself. And then I became very interested in brands. So like here's a music NFT. And every time, and when I own this NFT, what happens is I don't just own a little bit of a song. I actually get 1% of the 0.1% of the royalties of the song. And then the artist, every time this is sold, gets a piece of that as well. So me as a collector, I get a percentage of the sales. And the artist gets a percent of the transactions. So Web3 is about decentralization and participation. For me, it's about finding great global artists, and finding really cool projects. And I'll leave it on one note. This is a project called Invisible Friends. And this is a type of NFT called PFP, or a profile picture. These are the kinds of collections you hear, like Bored Ape Yacht Club, these big collections of work. And I really like what they're doing. And sometimes it's not just about creating art, it's creating utility. So people who own this NFT have access to clubs and restaurants and special perks because of the club, the community that they're a part of. I know I probably said a lot and I try to keep it very high level. I love NFTs because I love the communities and the artists, and I'm there to support them. And I'm enjoying creating them myself. So I can't wait for more conversation, and thank you.
And we'll have time to go into more details and clear up people's questions as we continue. All right, so Balor.
Okay, that was great intro to the world of NFTs, Zach. And also thank you, David, for inviting me to be part of this panel. And something I think I forgot to mention in my bio is that I also am faculty in CAMD. If any of the students, no, that's it's not in my bio. It's my fault. So if the students are, interested in having further conversations about this at any point, really, in the semester, feel free to reach out.
You definitely want to take a class with Balor before you graduate. Definitely.
Thanks, David. Okay, so that was a really great, introduction to the NFT communities, NFT value, and I prepared some work on the underlying blockchain structure and how that structure, how that framework works, so that the students can also understand the difference between the different types of blockchains, and what the sort of governing framework. So my background is in fashion and textiles, and there's a little bit of that flavor in my presentation. And let me start sharing my screen. Okay. Okay, do you all see the slides?
Yeah, we see your screen.
Okay, great. Okay, so blockchain as this sort of emerging technology has been used in various interesting ways, and one application has been how it's been kind of leveraged in the fashion industry to try to bring transparency to the supply chain. And so I'm going to try to tackle this from this perspective. And so from raw material production to manufacturing, then distribution and maintenance to end-of-life product management, every step of the fashion value chain can be thought of as a ripe ground for blockchain-specific interventions and creative experimentation. But of course, before we dive into any of this, we need to understand what a blockchain even is, right? And so a blockchain is a distributed ledger system programmed to record and track anything of value, such as NFTs, from financial records to land titles, product provenance, employment records, medical records, and more. And a blockchain stores this information in batches called blocks that are linked together in a chronological fashion to form a chain of blocks, hence blockchain. For example, if a person named Lee purchases a Louis Vuitton bag from his friend Marianne first, the information that Marianne owns this bag and that Lee does not needs to be logged as one entry on the blockchain. And then this would be followed by another entry that records the change of ownership. But if Lee then decides to sell the bag to another friend, to indicate this second change in ownership, the previous record cannot be simply rewritten or deleted. Instead, a new record needs to be created and added to the blockchain. This is based on the centuries-old method of the general financial ledger. And this is a non-destructive way to track data changes over time, coupled with the decentralized nature of the technology, reduces the ability for data tampering. And so the blockchain is designed to function as an accounting book, a copy of which everyone in the network owns. And to ensure data validity, everyone in the network needs to agree to all new entries. And another layer of security comes from a cryptographic puzzle that must be solved to create a new block. Onto which you can add new transactions. So in theory, any node in the network can have a go at solving this puzzle, and the computer that solves it shares the solution with all the other nodes on the network. And this is called proof of work. The network will then verify this proof of work, and if it's correct, if the answer to the puzzle that was presented is correct, a block will then be added to the chain. So the combination of these complex cryptographic puzzles and verification by many computers creates trust in the blockchain network and the data stored on this network. This makes the blockchain highly suited for an array of applications that need a database. And so, the blockchain itself can be thought of as a decentralized database. And additionally, the decentralization of governance means no more intermediaries, which gives us the opportunity to interact with our data directly in real time. For example, both consignment sellers and individual consumers could verify an item's authenticity by comparing its unique ID that Zach talked about, the digital signature, to entries in the decentralized database. Another example is that brands could work with suppliers and manufacturers to create an immutable and secure digital trail for their products, allowing customers to track their purchases to ensure that they were produced by ethical manufacturers while also holding brands accountable. And the unique identifier is essentially a series of numbers and letters, and it can take the form of, a QR code or an RFID tag embedded in the label or the design of the physical product. And so the 4 features of blockchain technology that the fashion industry, or in fact, any industry, can leverage are the transparency made possible by decentralized governance and open data sharing, the immutability of data once it's on the blockchain, so nobody is able to go back and delete entries or tamper with entries, and the traceability of this immutable data. And of course, this means that everyone involved needs to agree to use the same blockchain. And the problem currently, I think we're also facing in general, is that there's many different blockchains, and so there's kind of an interesting take on the idea of decentralization happening there. And everybody also needs to share their data. And it's these features of the blockchain that make it possible to achieve greater transparency in complex, global supply chains and products chain of custody, and including NFTs. And so, if we take a look at some more industry-specific examples of blockchain implementations, we have here.
1 minute.
Okay, great. We have here De Beers, which is the world's biggest diamond producer by the value of its gems. De Beers initiated the Tracer project along with several other diamond manufacturers, and the pilot program was an open source blockchain platform that can be used to verify the authenticity of a selection of rough diamonds as they moved from the mine to cutter and to polisher, then through to a jeweler. And the goal was to demonstrate the feasibility of tracking a diamond through the supply chain, through the value chain, to ensure that they are not coming from conflict zones where gems may be used to finance violence. And another example, which is more related to the creative economy, is Fuchsia Shoes, which is a sustainable footwear brand offering artisanal handicrafts originating from Pakistan. They partnered with Provenance, which was one of the first startups to offer blockchain solutions for fashion, to allow their customers, again, to verify product-specific supply chain information. And another interesting example is what Levi Strauss did with their worker well-being program initiated in collaboration with Consensus. And so as part of their initial launch, they partnered with Harvard University to survey workers about their overall well-being in the workplace to better understand, adapt, and improve worker well-being, using real-time data. This means asking very personal questions about one's direct managers and their daily experience with, which some people may be wary of speaking out about. And so the company is developing a blockchain platform in collaboration with Consensus to guarantee both anonymity and transparency. And then, of course, all of these key features of the blockchain can be taken to other parts of the industry and leveraged in interesting ways. And so that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Blor. That was a lovely, lovely summary. Great. We are establishing a solid baseline to get into a conversation about this topic. And now let's hear from Martin.
The title of my talk, which I have to say is probably the lamest title I've come up with in a while, New Kids on the Blockchain, Cryptomania, and Digital Art. So and there's a cartoon here on the left that you might enjoy, Gollum sitting at a screen. So you can't own the precious physically, but you can pay to have your name listed as its owner in an online distributed database. I'll leave you to ponder that one. All right, so let's get started. I have an epigraph from William Gibson. It's a well-known quote. Of course, the future is already here. It's not just evenly distributed. You may recognize that image. Certainly if you were watching the Oscars the other day.
Yeah.
People are pretty quick out of the traps with hinting stuff. This is from OpenSea. Get your limited NFT of the moment Will Smith pimp slapped, and I quote Chris Rock at the Oscars, only 420 available. Not sure how many they've sold yet, but we can maybe come back to this interesting anecdote. So I work on online creative communities. I've been following a lot of different communities for quite a long time now. So, of course, one of those communities, one of the biggest communities that's really been blowing up over the last few years, particularly, is around what's called the NFT space. So, what I want to do here is just try to lay out very quickly for you how I see that sort of landscape at the moment in terms of the different dynamics. And what I see really are three quite distinct communities. There is some overlap in one case there's some overlap at least, but one of the things that is most immediately striking about looking at the NFT space for me is how polarized it is. And you can see here I've broken it down into three potential categories that we can use to think about the dynamics really of the NFT space at the moment in terms of what's going on there, because there are multiple communities. The first community is what I would call the crypto-libertarians, a term kind of derived from cyber-libertarianism, which are the people that are seeing NFT art as a new marketplace, essentially, which offers certain advantages to artists, as Zach has been describing. The second category is what I call the open source collectivists, who are associated with something called the anti-NFT movement, which has kicked off what one art critic called the Great NFT War of 2021, a war that is certainly far from over. And then the third category comprises digital artists of various kinds, and this is something that is of greatest interest to me because it constitutes what could be called a third space. So yes, in a certain sense there is a polarization between more kind of crypto utopians and crypto dystopians, as I'll say more about in a minute, but there is also this third space, and it's the third space that I find most interesting in terms of how artists are engaging with NFT art or crypto art. So here is a kind of a brief typology of the first two categories and the kind of historical background. I think there's a kind of timeline that we can trace through that kind of goes from top to bottom here. And you can see, just look down the two columns on either side, right? So on the one hand, we have the sort of commercial side, and the other side we have more of an open source model that we can track right the way through to the contemporary anti-NFT movement. So we start out with a sort of older dynamic between the commercial software providers, most notably, of course, Microsoft and Apple, and then the open source movement, the Free Software Foundation led by Richard Stallman, Linux as an alternative to Microsoft and Apple. It's a completely different model, which is collaborative, collectivist, not profit-oriented. We see a similar dynamic when we look at the game industry between the major players there, just a few names mentioned, and the interaction with the indie gaming movement on platforms like Itch.io. When we look at social media, we have a dynamic between the commercial social media platforms and what's become known as the Fediverse, which is a decentralized model of and non-profit oriented social media platforms like Mastodon, become known as the small web, communities like Gemini, which developed out of the Gopher community. And then we come to right back up to the present, where we have the NFT marketplaces like Foundation, OpenSea, Rarible, Hicket, Nunk, the list goes on. I mean, there are a ton now of marketplaces, as they are, quite overtly known. And against this, we have this movement that I've been kind of looking at more closely recently, which is what's called the NFT movement and the development of alternative models of artistic distribution, such as things like the concept of EFTs as opposed to NFTs, extremely fungible tokens, the Reddit groups, Twitter feeds, and so on. So there's been this kind of quite significant pushback coming from people, I think, that are originally coming out of these older communities, the open source community, the Fediverse, as it's become known, a federated model of social media communication. Here's an example. This is just from an official statement issued by Itch.io just a month or two back, actually. Very kind of succinct, but kind of brutal. A few have asked about our stance on NFTs. NFTs are a scam. If you think they're legitimately useful for anything other than the exploitation of creators, financial scams, and the destruction of the planet, then we ask that you please reevaluate your life choices. Peace.
1 minute, Martin.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'm moving forward a little bit. This is the Reddit anti-NFT group. We skip through. This is a website called Extremely Fungible Tokens, where they're generating. Whoops, that's my own timer going off. We have things like the NFT Bay, which is distributing NFTs the way the Pirate Bay has been doing with NFTs. So there are various examples of this. This is actually an NFT work that is for sale, but it's kind of like a diatribe against NFTs. We're kind of familiar with this kind of stance of critique, I suppose. Critiques of capitalism are surprisingly lucrative, as we know from examples like Squid Game, Hunger Games, and so on. And we're seeing some similar dynamics in the kind of critiques of NFT culture that are themselves NFTs. But you can see that the anti-NFT movement is a kind of brand as well. So what I'm really interested in is this third space. And here's a quote which I'm going to sort of more or less wrap up with from Tina Rivers-Ryan, who's, I think, a very good critic with Art Forum about all these kinds of issues. And so here's what Tina Rivers-Ryan means by third space. So thoughtful voices from the digital art community, which tends to see NFTs as more than just a gamified investment opportunity or a joke, are reframing the question by modeling how to work through technology's contradictions and shape its values with intention, moving slowly and building things instead of moving fast and breaking things. Many artists are part of this third space too, using NFTs to advance more philosophical conversations about blockchain technologies and the ideas they represent. So, I don't know if I can get this to work. There it goes. Yes. So this is something called NFTV, which is a YouTube channel which is showcasing an exhibition which is just about to start in April, coming out of the Transfer Gallery. It's an online gallery in partnership with Left Gallery, which is another online, sort of alternative online gallery. It's called Pieces of Me. And you can access it through the website here. I'll put the link up into the chat for you to take a look at. But
yeah, if you could share that
great.
link in the chat, and I'll make sure to add it to our follow-up materials. But
yeah,
we need to wrap this up now.
yeah, I'm done pretty much. Yeah, this is my
Great,
last
great.
slide.
Yeah, this is a really nice note to end on.
Yeah, so I'd like us to maybe have some conversation more about this third space of digital artists who are kind of engaging with NFT culture, but not in a kind of neither in an entrepreneurial way nor in a kind of open source critical way.
Right.
Yeah. So I'll stop there.
All right. If you can stop your share screen. Okay. So Zach, you wanted 1 minute before we get into Q&A?
Yeah. I told you I didn't want to use any of that 7 minutes around hype. I want to use 1 minute on hype.
Okay. 1 minute of hype.
I'm getting calls right now from employers, from brands, from venture capitalists, like begging me to refer early career people who have a knowledge of Web3. I've never seen anything like it. The demand is absurd. If I were in college right now and I wanted to refine my skill set and make myself very marketable as an artist or as a professional, this is critical. Prada, Adidas, Under Armour, fashion in the metaverse, Gucci, you name it, like it's all moving in this direction. I understand there are some legitimate reasons why NFTs can hurt the environment and are not a great idea. I also understand that there are NFTs that are responsible for the environment if you have them on the right blockchain. But my hope is if you are early stage career, that you embrace the opportunity to learn everything you can now, because it is an incredibly marketable skill. And the last time I saw anything like this was 18 years ago when Twitter, Facebook, and Web 2 launched, and it wasn't even this pervasive. So that is a bit of hype, but I have to tell you that please take this opportunity to learn because it is incredibly shaping right now.
Thank you for that. So clearly, there's a reason why there's so much hype and pushback around this technology, because clearly there is a huge number of opportunities, Zach, as you're saying, but there's also this incredible pushback and very articulate critiques of NFT. I mean, coming from not the lunatic fringe, but very credible sociologists, technologists, system architects, people in the financial community, people in the tech community. And I guess I just wanted to start us off with the elephant in the room. It's like, why is there so much controversy around this particular technology in terms of the combination of blockchain, crypto technology, and NFTs? Because this does remind me of when the web was first happening. Because I remember I was graduating from MIT right as the commercial web was starting to become a thing, right at that transition point, right? So I started grad school when Tim Berners-Lee was sharing his web server freely with other academic institutions, and people started building websites. And then when I graduated, all of a sudden, web consultancies were rising, and there was this huge hype around the web. So I kind of saw that transition, and I see a similar pattern, that there's this initial technology that a lot of insiders start working on, and then it breaks into, it goes out into the wild, and there's this huge hype around it, right? Because in the year 2000, you had corporations spending $500,000 to have a bunch of fresh graduates and a couple of management consultants build a digital business for them for $500,000 a pop, right? And so we're seeing a similar gold rush and a similar exuberance. But is it rational exuberance or is it irrational exuberance? And why so much controversy around this topic? And who would like to tackle that question? Valor, Zach, Martin?
I just spoke, so I'll defer for now.
I'm more than happy to, but I'm also happy to defer to another panelist first.
Valor, I think it's on you.
Okay, so I guess there's many contributing factors, right, to this debate. Part of it is to do with the fact that NFTs represent something digital, something intangible, and it's hard to justify the value of something that you cannot physically hold and kind of experience in that material way. And I think that goes back to the idea of digital metallism, right? Is it real? Is like the question. And then in addition to that, there's the environmental factors, particularly with the proof of work blockchain, that requires everybody to be solving this cryptographic puzzle and running this algorithm on their computers, and that's not a very resource efficient way to add a block to the blockchain and then mint NFTs and to carry out these blockchain transactions. And so blockchains are just in general not environmentally friendly. And there's proof of stake blockchains that are now emerging, but they're still very small and not ready to be scaled to the extent that we need to scale them so that we can transfer all of these NFTs onto them. And then I think the other part of the puzzle is just to do with how complex it is to mint an NFT, to purchase an NFT, and how one would have to kind of end up paying quite a bit to set up a digital wallet, to buy crypto, right? And then to send that crypto to your digital wallet. And then each of these transactions accrue gas fee, which is the transaction fee attached to each blockchain, right? And so after going through that process, paying all of these gas fees and minting your NFT, what if your NFT doesn't sell? What if nobody knows that you have an NFT? And so then you have to kind of build this community and create this hype. So creating hype is kind of part of the job. And so those are like I think the three main concerns, I guess. But I'm sure that Zach and Martin would also add to those or expand on those.
Yeah, Zach, would you like to expand on that?
I would love to, and I think that you've covered a lot of great ground. So thank you for doing that. I think there are a few ways of critiquing that are not helpful and that are helpful, and I do think it's binary. So let me express to you what I think is an unhelpful critique, and then what I think is like a valid or helpful critique. So this is what happens when I talk to a lot of people that I know about, Web3 and NFTs. They'll go to a site like this. This is a really credible NFT artist who has who is kind of one of the four people, like one of the founders of NFT photography. And they'll look at this site and they'll look at these photos. Does anyone know in the audience here, like how much one of these photos is going for? Any guesses in the chat window? Every photo on this screen is going for upwards of $1 million. Every single one of them. And so you might say like, oh my gosh, this is going for $1 million. Like I could take this artwork. It's not even that good. Like what? I think that kind of critique is really not very helpful, because you could walk into any museum and do the same thing with any, oh, that's Picasso. I could take it. I mean, that kind of like why is a picture of a Bored Ape going for $1 million? Like that kind of like being aghast at buying digital work. I think that's really somewhat ignorant because you're not understanding the cultural context or the scarcity or anything about this movement. You're just saying that's a lot of money for a photo. Not helpful. I think it's very not helpful. What I think is helpful, or where things go wrong, is there's this notion, I don't know if it's offensive or not, so if it is, I apologize, but there's a word called like crypto bro. And crypto bros are like people that made a whole lot of money in 2017 through now, tens of millions of dollars on speculating in cryptocurrency. And they had all this money and they didn't know really what to do with it. And one application for the money was to buy NFTs. So to demonstrate their wealth, they would buy into very valuable projects. And the people who only had a lot of money could hold a Bored Ape. And they started to show how wealthy and powerful they were by showcasing the pieces that you could not afford, and kind of people that didn't have great taste would do so in a way that would be borderline offensive. People that did have great taste, they do it differently. But so there's a particular way of doing that kind of offended people. And then there's this notion of creating hype where there is a project, let's say that Will Smith like slaps someone, and you want to buy that project in OpenSea. For about a day, the entire internet will buzz about that project, and it'll go really, really high. It'll go from, $1 to like $2,500 in 10 minutes. And then because there's no longevity or long-term value in the project, it'll just drop, and all the value will just go nowhere. And so there's just like these cycles of hype that are really accentuated in Web3. Moreover, there's a lot of scammers out there. We haven't even got into how do you actually participate using a wallet and buy stuff. But if you go to a site, do you guys remember when I showed you Invisible Friends, that one thing, the one NFT that I really like? So if you go to the wrong website, it's extremely easy to set up a website called invisiblefriends.co, and they'll take your money because there's scammers that set up sites that look like Invisible Friends that are not. So that's really, really dangerous. How do you combat crypto scams like pump and dump? I mean, the way you combat everything in the world is you work with very credible people that you know and have a good reputation. You look at people over time. You can see their work over time. You can audit what they do. You can follow them on Twitter. They have followings on Discord. Discord is like a Slack-like community. This is an area that if you don't know what you're doing and you have money to spend, you can get your money taken extremely quickly. And there are people out there that are very good at doing it. I got fleeced really quickly my first week when I thought I was buying a Nike project, but someone took a clone website that looked exactly like Nike's website, exactly. And it was like Nike, like NIIKE.com. And I clicked on it and I bought something for $300 that I thought was selling elsewhere for $3,000. And it completely took me for a ride. I'm very lucky that my entire collection of NFTs didn't get wiped out, because it could have. So this is a space that's fraught with challenges. It's also, people say that it's a Ponzi scheme, it's all about selling it for the next person. So like creating hype that you can sell to the next person. And then moreover, the environment stuff, like everyone meaning people I know, talk about one transaction on Ethereum, just buying one thing on Ethereum requires the same amount of energy as lighting your home for an entire month. Imagine if you swiped your credit card and that costs the same amount of energy as lighting your home for 1 month. So people are very upset about what NFTs do for the environment. And that's why I buy most of my NFTs on Tezos, which is a different kind of blockchain, and not Ethereum, which is it's challenging. So anyway, I can go off and off, but I want to stop there and pause.
All right. Well, so we're getting some questions questions are starting to roll in here in the chat. So let me, let's get to the audience questions, because there's, and this actually dovetails on what you've been saying, Zach. So Danny asks, because an NFT's value comes from the marketing behind it, it seems like as soon as you buy one, your job is to convince others that the piece has value and that the NFT movement has longevity. How can someone who doesn't own an NFT avoid the feeling that everyone's talking about them as just trying to avoid their assets losing value before they can offload them? So I know you addressed some of these issues, but I'd love to kind of sort of tie the bowstring on this particular issue, because I think a lot of people have this question.
May I respond quickly, or would you like another panelist to respond?
Why don't you respond, and then maybe Martin and Belor, you can add whatever you think needs to be added.
So there's a subtlety between really being excited about an artist and then trying to artificially pump value. So when I see people that are really excited, they change their profile pictures on Twitter to the work of the artist. They go into the artist's fan communities on Discord and they're active and involved. They are sharing what the artist is doing. They really love what the artist is doing, and they feel like they're a part of a larger movement because that work speaks to them, and the fans of that work are people they want to hang out with. That's the fandom that I think is very real, and you don't have to own the NFT to be a part of that fandom or the appreciation. You can share it, you can like it, you can learn about it. I mean, who has $1 million to buy that photo? So I think that's the good stuff. The bad stuff is where, let's say someone has access to buy an NFT early, so they buy it early. And then they try to go around and like convince other people and send them messages and persuade them that the project is going to be really, really good. And that they have to get in now because the floor price, like the bottom, the price that is the bottom to buy in a piece of work is going to rise really quickly if you don't get in fast. So that kind of like speed and fast and urgency, when you start feeling that urgency from people as opposed to that long-term, it's just like investing, day traders versus value stocks. When you feel that urgency from someone, it's usually that pump mentality. When it's like, I love this artist, like I showed you 2 artists I love. I don't care if they're worth $1 or $1 million, I still love them.
Belor or Martin, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, Martin, would you like to go first?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a very good question. Certainly, who was it asking the question, Dave?
That first question came from Danny.
I mean, how is value created, really? I mean, there are 2 kinds of value here. Really, it's the aesthetic value, right? What Zach is saying, like, I really love this artist. And then there's the economic value, of course. And so it's really all about the interface between those 2, or the disconnect between the 2 in a lot of cases. Zach, you said, who has $1 million to drop on this work, right? Those examples that you showed. Well, apparently some people do. Actually, quite a lot of people have more than $1 million to drop as well. They have $600,000 to drop on a GIF of Nyan Cat, or they have $69 million to drop on the complete works of Beeple since 2007 or whatever it was. So some people do have that money, and they are spending that money like we wouldn't believe. And so this is an aspect that really interests me. Like, why would anybody do that when, as the anti-NFT movement are so quick to point out, you just simply right-click and save. Right? You save the JPEG.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, one of the terms that's often become associated with the anti-NFT movement is right-click. Like, one click has become like a slogan in itself. You'll hear it a lot if you kind of follow any of the anti-NFT discourse. It's like, particularly on the NFT bay, as you saw earlier. So why are people dropping $69 million or less? I mean, people's work is the third most expensive work by a living artist at this point. Why would somebody drop that amount of money on it, especially when they had hardly even looked closely at the work itself? And I think we have to kind of dig deep to try to get answers to these questions, and maybe look to disciplines outside the immediate vicinity to try to understand what's going on here. I mean, frankly, the only way I can make sense of it is by turning to fields like anthropology and thinking about potlatch, which is a kind of status competition in traditional societies, which involves conspicuous destruction of wealth and the kind of status that comes with that. It's a kind of a long-standing ritual of traditional societies known as potlatch. It's been studied in the Pacific Northwest in particular, in which different communities compete against each other by conspicuously destroying all of their wealth in front of each other. It's like a status competition. So, I think that's one framework you could use for understanding why people seem so willing to just simply destroy their own wealth. Well, obviously they have enough money to burn, $69 million in the case of people. But of course you get tremendous prestige from that, right? From having the kind of economic clout to be able to do that. In many ways, this is business as usual in the art world. This is the way it's always been. That the people that can afford the most expensive works are the ones that have the highest status, right? But in this case, content has become almost arbitrary. I mean, if you look at people's collection, I encourage you to do that because very few people have done it. And Ben Davis on ArtNet has an absolutely brilliant, analysis, like a close reading of those people works, and you would not believe it. It's really worth reading. I'll put it in the chat. But still, somebody spent $69 million on this. So I think a lot of it, I mean, you can read it through the frameworks of anthropology and potlatch or sociology, Pierre Bourdieu's concept of distinction and cultural capital. They can help us to sort of understand this incredibly inflated market and what's going on here. And I think one way we could see what's going on is some kind of ritual performance of wealth, really, by appropriating these otherwise rather arbitrary objects in a lot of cases.
Well, that kind of brings us to our next question. I love how this is all sort of dovetailing really nicely. So Ben has a question that although not all NFTs are created through generative methods, generative art makes up a significant portion of NFT work. There have been many instances of open source software being used to create or flip NFTs, which opens up the critique that NFTs represent a new stage of online capitalism, namely the financialization of everything. How do what do you all think about this monetizing of that which was never meant to be monetized? Who wants to tackle that first?
I have a very quick comment.
Question.
Yeah.
So two things. First, I want to clarify that when I was showing Justin's work, the photography, I am not making a comment on any of the work like that it's not worth $1 million. I respect these artists that I'm sharing with you. So if I'm sharing any work, I just want to clarify, I'm not commenting or questioning the value of the work that I'm sharing. So I don't want to be misconstrued. This is being recorded. So I just want to be very clear about that piece. I respect the artists that I'm sharing. But I also think it's on the one hand, like capitalism, it almost gets us to exploitation very quickly in conversation. And I also want to look at the flip side of that. Like, isn't it nice that people who create visual works now have a new mechanism to be paid for their work? That artists have new mechanisms to participate in the secondary and tertiary sales of their work. So I actually see it not as exploiting people or cutting people out or introducing a different intention around monetization, but rather cutting people in. like letting artists and letting collectors have new sources of claiming and developing value. And I think there's always the pump and dump mentalities, but I really like the new form of capitalism because it's giving more people the chance to participate, not just in the US, but globally.
Allure, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there's an interesting question around what is okay to monetize and what is not okay to monetize. And I'm inclined to think that you could monetize almost everything, right, in today's society. And the idea that you could monetize the code that was used to generate artwork, it's been around for some time. I had an artist that, as part of the Fabirium work that I did last year, I was working with, and she creates 3D printed sculptures. And so when you 3D print something, there's G code that tells the machine how to move and how much of the plastic to deposit, etc. Right? And so she was one of the NFTs that she minted with us came with the G code, the code that was used to create the artwork. And so the idea is that if a person and also this was a phygital NFT, so it has a digital component, but also comes with the actual physical artifact, the 3D printed object. And the idea is that if somebody breaks the sculpture, the physical sculpture, you still have the G code, so you could 3D print it again. And so there's this idea of longevity there. And kind of going back to this idea of value, right? I think it's kind of difficult for most people to make sense of how all this operates and what is valuable and what defines value. But there's, I think, after a few years, there would have emerged some some criteria, so to speak, that would help determine really, or help distinguish between what is authentically long-term, what has authentic long-term value versus what is just short-term hype. And it exists in the fine arts world, it exists in the fashion world, and I think people will become more trained to be able to kind of differentiate between the two. And an emerging, I think, way to talk about it, talk about value, is also the experience that these NFTs afford, right? Being able to participate in community building and kind of make connections, with to others and build relationships with others as part of these communities is a big factor that contributes to whether the NFT is valuable or not, but also whether that NFT interacts with the blockchain itself in interesting ways or not is a big factor to take into account. Because NFTs, you can take a screenshot of something and then mint that as an NFT, but also there are some interesting protocols now that allow that particular NFT to be used in interesting ways, maybe as social tokens, maybe as some kind of gamified, game element, and so when you then go and join these NFT communities, you're actually engaging in kind of a ritualistic, orchestrated activity. Maybe you're playing a game, maybe you're going on a scavenger hunt, or so the experiences that the NFTs afford also contribute to how valuable they are. And then there's also difference between an NFT being, I think when we say NFT, we often refer to the actual artwork, the digital artwork, but in reality, that's not quite true, right? Because anybody can take a screenshot of that artwork and they can own it. So the NFT really is the kind of certification that proves that you own this artwork. And I think that's important to highlight, because that intersects with also what Martin said before about how it's a display of wealth, right? And you want to show others that you own these expensive pieces and these expensive NFTs. That's part of the performance that you're putting out there. And so, you know, there's interesting ways that we can showcase what we own, and that's part of the puzzle. Yeah.
I think that's an important distinction to make, right? That the NFT is a certificate of authenticity. It is a transaction. It is a token. So just like the piece of paper with the provenance of an artwork that you can ask a gallerist to show you when you're thinking about buying a piece of work on their wall, right? The certificate and the artwork are different things. And to conflate them creates a lot of confusion. So I'm really glad that you cleared that up. And this notion of community, Zach, that you've been talking about, and also the cultural component in terms of part of our rituals and cultural practice can't be ignored either. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, Martin, because we're talking here about the intersection, right, of art objects, cultural practice, technological infrastructure, and social protocols, right, that are all coming together. Zach, you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I do. I don't necessarily feel qualified to opine about it very much. Maybe the other panelists do, but you know, crypto and NFTs have been used for money laundering. They have been used for illicit, you know, transactions. They've been used, you know, to do a lot of bad things. That's not a line of logic that I go out in the world and talk about, but I do know that people have very strong feelings about it, and that there are probably some legitimate points to be made around that. But I just want to make sure that, you know, it's not all rainbows. There are some real things going on here.
Martin?
Yeah, maybe it would be helpful to share something a bit more concrete with you in terms of something I've been looking at recently. Let me just share my screen with you, and then I can show you this better. You should be able to see this now. Can you see that?
Yep.
So this is something I've been looking at recently, which is kind of fun, and you could maybe work off this a little bit. So this is something I came across quite recently. AI-generated mutant space otters from Jupiter, literally. May not sound very promising, but it intrigued me for sure. So this is on a new blockchain, I think, called Jupiter, that I've been looking at, that has its own currency. I was considering buying one of these, this collection, which is, as you can see, there are 50, only 50 in this case. I mean, it's not the 10K model has become the dominant one since CryptoPunks, and there are lots of examples of that, of course. But in this case, it's back to what Zach was saying about scarcity earlier. We have a very limited edition here of 50 of these images. So let's just read the description through. Some of the earliest colonists of the Jupiter system were exposed to massive doses of radiation when they passed through the intensely charged particle belts within Jupiter's magnetosphere. The result of this exposure varies greatly, but one emergent trend was the formation of what have been described as otter-like mutations. Though the cause of these mutations was later identified and we learned to minimize exposure for future voyages, the story of the JUP otter mutations was kept secret for fear of scaring away future settlers, of which many were still needed. These portraits are among the only documentation of their story. The JUP otter mutations are a collection of 50 human/AI collaborative generative works created using Disco Diffusion and Adobe Photoshop. This kind of speaks to the question about AI-generated work, which we're starting to see more and more examples of now. This is just one example, and this is the image you're looking at is one of a series of 50. I was kind of interested in buying this. It's 2,500 Jupe, I guess, would be the name of the currency. And of course, when you look through usually it's the currency that you see is Ethereum, ETH. So you're kind of making your conversion from that to US dollars, which is what is needed ultimately still to buy Ethereum. So it took me a while even to figure out like what the cost of this is. And when I eventually did the conversion, I realized that I would have to buy the currency using Ethereum with all the gas fees that are associated. At every step of in every stage, there is a little bit creamed off, the gas fee as it's called. But this work comes out, really at a bargain price, I have to say, compared to some of the materials we've been looking at today. If I'm correct, this image would cost you about $45 US to buy. Seems very reasonable, relatively speaking. The question is really why I would want to do that, and that's really what I've been wondering about for quite some time, when obviously, as I'm doing now, I'm actually saving the image, like even as we speak. So why would I now want to pay $45 for that image just to know that I officially own that image? And this is really a big question for all of us, I think, and particularly, of course, I mean, even for $45 as opposed to, $45,000 or something. Why would I want to pay that? So that's something to think about. I think that on a more kind of theoretical level, one point I wanted to make is that I think a problem of a lot of the discussion going on at the moment about this is that we're tending to think about art too much in a monolithic way, where there in fact are really multiple categories of art that we're dealing with here, at least three. The first is what we're looking at, which is what I would call commercial art. In other words, art that is generated, and I do mean generated, and we're using software for this now, like Disco Diffusion, the Python notebook that produced this. So it's generated explicitly for trade and for economic exchange. It's overtly commercial art. A second model is what I would call communitarian art, which is coming more out of those communities, that I was talking about earlier, the open source movement, the decentralized social media, a Fediverse, platforms like Itch.io, that have models of a kind of pay what you like. Bandcamp does this a little bit as well, but Itch.io in indie gaming development as well. It's a fundamentally different model where the idea is much more communitarian. It's about exchanging your creative work with one another without necessarily trying to get rich out of it or trading it. So, if there is an economic model, but it's based on sustainability rather than profit. So if you like, it's a kind of non-profit communitarian model. So I call it communitarian art, which involves either sharing and bartering, people swapping their work with each other in a kind of open source mode. Here's my code, generate your own, that kind of model, which goes back to the open source movement. And then this third category that I've been talking about, which is critical artworks. So commercial, communitarian, and critical artworks, which are kind of engaging in a more kind of often philosophical way, an analytical way, and are using art as a way of sort of asking bigger questions about the previous two categories, really. Does all art have to be monetized? And if so, why? What is the function of art today? What does it mean to own something today? Exactly. Does that even matter at this point? I mean, certainly in the communitarian model, individual ownership is not the primary priority because the things are shared across the community. So the critical art, which is the third category, is the one that I find most interesting, is the one that is engaging on a more of a kind of meta level, if you like, and asking questions about technology, blockchain, meaning of art, how value is defined, and so on. So there's a significant body of work coming from digital artists that are engaging with these questions, and it is quite distinct from the commercial art that you're looking at right now. So I'm sorry I went on too long. Yeah.
That's okay. Could you stop your screen share?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I think it's valuable to bring up those three categories, and because clearly the maker's intention and what type of conversation and community they want to create around their work does make a difference, right? And is this, and so I think this provides another way of thinking about value and what we're trying to do with all this. We're at 11:21, so I want to start to wrap things up, and we have one more question from the class. Yes, Zach. You're muted.
Of course, I had to do that once.
Yeah, that has to be, Zoom has to figure out how to automate that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how long it took other people, but it took me hundreds of hours of time and money and energy to learn this stuff. And the conversation we're having today, I think it's not a 101 conversation. This is a pretty advanced conversation on a lot of different topics, on a lot of different, it's on art, it's on economy, it's on capitalism. I hope your heads aren't exploding, because I know that if I just came to this topic with all these different possibilities, it would be really confusing. And I just want to acknowledge that, because in order to participate in this, there's a certain, just like any language, you have to know a few verbs, a few nouns. You have to know how to ask where the bathroom is, how to say, excuse me. But if we did that, if that was all we talked about, it would probably be a pretty boring hour and a half. So I just want to acknowledge that this is very immersive, and it probably is very confusing, but I hope there's a few threads that are interesting that lead you to a path, because this is a complicated conversation that certainly feels like it's a lot, and I appreciate it, but I just want to say that.
I mean, the goal is a starting point, right? I mean, the students did read one or two of these prereqs that we talked about, just, to introduce the terminology, but clearly, this is a starting point, right? Just like any new culture, learning a new language is what I meant to say, is it requires immersion, and there is that period of confusion, which is actually a normal and healthy part of learning anything new, because you have to stick with it, and you have to hear things more than once, right? And you have to, and slowly things start to make sense, especially when you start digging in, asking questions. And speaking of questions, Olivia would like to know, and I think this is a good question to kind of wrap up our discussion with, because we're coming up on the 11:30 hour. How do you combat crypto scams like pump and dump schemes and the instability of crypto? And also, what does it mean for the market that much of the NFT landscape is shaped by memes and internet jokes?
So maybe I can try to tackle one part of the question, which is around scams and security in general, right? So security is a big concern for any blockchain, and specialists that work on making blockchains as secure as possible are in high demand. And this is because the blockchain itself is code generated, and there's different ways that you can hack into that code, take over parts of the blockchain, etc. And so there's been many projects that just did not have that level of security that, and so the blockchains got hacked, and with that, the users of the blockchain suffered financially, and that continues to be a problem. And I think it points to the fact that all of it is still evolving. The blockchain itself is evolving. There's many different protocols that are emerging, and the old protocols are also becoming kind of obsolete because of the scaling up issue. The Ethereum blockchain itself is kind of struggling because now everybody's trying to mint on the Ethereum blockchain, but it's not able to kind of accommodate all of that, because again, it's based on the proof of work protocol, and there is a you need time to be able to add a block, and so on. So security is a big concern, and at the same time, those defining features of a blockchain, transparency, immutability, and the fact that you can remain anonymous to some extent, those all lead to these wrong uses of the blockchain, right? That you can do money laundering, you can sell drugs, and so on, and that's part of the reason also why we're trying to regulate the space a lot, and hopefully with more regulation, this will become a safer space for new learners or new visitors, right, to enter. So
right, we need to start wrapping this up.
It's complex, yeah.
It's complex.
Yeah.
But one more thing, Balor, could you describe briefly what you meant by social tokens?
Yeah, so social tokens are, type of token that influencers or community leaders would issue to their fans or followers, and using these tokens, the followers can interact with the influencer, the celebrity, let's say, in interesting ways. They can have a one-on-one chat with them, or they can purchase exclusive merchandise and so on. And so the tokens allow the owner to interact with that community in general in interesting ways that others cannot. And so social tokens are kind of becoming this new way to generate value and interact with your followers. And it's mostly used by creators, content creators.
Great. So it's time to wrap this up. I want to give each of you 60 seconds to share whatever it is you want to share in the form of some closing remarks or provocations or prompts or questions or statements or whatever it is. So Martin, I'd like to start with you. 60 seconds.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it brief. So really, this is just a follow-up to what Bella was just saying, which I thought was really interesting. Before the social tokens, which was also interesting in terms of how fan culture has been instrumentalized like this, and yeah, that's fascinating. I'd like to talk more with you about that sometime. So, but there's some paradoxes here, I think. A lot of paradoxes. One of the paradoxes that strikes me is that around this notion of protocol, which I think is a concept, a very important concept that Alex Galloway has a book about, although he's not writing about NFTs. We can think about this issue of protocols and regulation. You mentioned the need for regulation to prevent the kind of scams taking place that we're increasingly hearing about. So the paradox is this, as I understand it. One of the...
Wrap it up. That was supposed to be a minute.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Well, I'll just try to keep it a sentence then. So it just seems paradoxical to me that the blockchain, because it's a distributed architecture, was supposed to be kind of unhackable and unfraudable. And obviously that's being proved wrong, because people will always find creative ways of hacking the system in some way or another. So now people are talking, literally, we've just heard people talking about the need for regulation. And yet the way the blockchain was presented to us by the cyber libertarians was that, there is no regulation here, but it's also secure.
All right, speaking of regulation, I'm going to regulate you on time.
Go ahead.
Zach,
go
1
ahead.
minute.
All right, I'm done.
Okay, here's 1 minute. I'm going to give you some action items. The first
Excellent.
thing you need to do is get a wallet. And this is the MetaMask wallet. And the wallet is like a passport to Web3. I don't have time to tell you about why, but you need a wallet. And that's pretty much the industry standard, that one. The next invitation is go to Super Rare, which is probably the most respected fine arts platform for artists, and find an artist that you like and start checking out their work and asking some questions. Hey, this is cool. What are they on Twitter? Let me follow them. Like, just start playing around with an artist that you like. So the 2 actions I have for you is sign up for a MetaMask. You'll find out why later, and go on a Super Rare and find yourself an artist that you like.
All right, thank you, Zach. And Belor, you have the final word. Try to keep it under 1 minute, please.
Yeah, I will. So my advice is very simple. Go join an NFT community, maybe several communities, and that will help you understand why everybody's so excited about this. And part of it is because of the belonging that you feel when you're part of that community, and how you can interact with the people in the community, and go explore also social tokens and what they are and what they afford, etc. And I think I would just in general say, pay attention to the types of experiences afforded by different NFTs, NFT protocols, and different types of blockchains. Yeah, that's it.
Great, thank you very much. So Zach, Belor, Martin, my students, our guests that joined us today, thank you so much for sharing this conversation with us. I will share a blog post that has follow-up links that I and the panelists have worked on together. So we will have next steps for you and valuable resources in a follow-up document. And hopefully this will help to try to clear up some of the confusion and misconceptions about what are NFTs, and so that you can decide for yourself, are these the artist's friend or just another financial folly? So thank you so much for being part of this panel discussion today. And that concludes our panel. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Belor.
Thank you, David.
And thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, everyone.
Continue the conversation.